When you set out to write your first book, there are a lot of challenging steps ahead. You have to plan, you have to develop, you have to draft the thing. But often I find that the most challenging aspects of writing and publishing your first book are actually the mindset issues, and chief among those is getting feedback. So many of us have had the experience of turning in a paper we thought was so good, only to get it back from a teacher who had marked it all up in red pen. And this is why so often I find that authors finish a really strong book manuscript, but then freeze at the point they need to get feedback. That's why today I want to give you 3 tips for getting the strongest, most helpful feedback you can get on your nonfiction manuscript. Stay tuned. I'm Dr. Amanda Nell Edgar, the founder of Page and Podium Press. Every expert author's book is unique, and one of the things that we in the book industry are called to do is to draw out that uniqueness and meet every author where they are. And that's why I created the Expert Author Quiz. This freebie is going to give you a chance to go through the most common questions that I use to diagnose where folks are on their book journey. The quiz takes 3 to 5 minutes, and when you're done, you'll get a full readout of other authors just like you who have made it big in the industry, as well as the strengths you've got, the likely weaknesses along the way, and of course, some practical, personalized advice on how to best move forward. You can take the quiz now at pageandpodium.com/quiz. Today, we are talking about getting effective, efficient feedback on your full nonfiction manuscript. And before we dive into the 3 tips that I have, these are very discrete tips that you can use today. I want to start by really defining what we mean by effective feedback, because I do often find that when folks try to get this initial feedback, oftentimes from their personal circle, from folks they know, they will often find that either what they hear back is, "Oh my gosh, it was so good. You did such a good job," which feels good, but isn't really effective. Or on the other hand, they will get line edits back. They will get that dreaded marked up document that, while that person was helpful, they did put a lot of work, I'm sure, into giving you those line edits. Often I find line edits are not even what we need at that stage. If this is your first time getting feedback on this manuscript, you almost certainly do not need line edits. And what that means is you have now gotten feedback that is not only not helpful for you, that was also kind of a waste of time for the person giving it to you. And most importantly of all, you've also probably gotten feedback that has made you a little bit less confident. No, friends, when we need feedback at these early stages, it must balance being helpful, pushing us to grow more, telling us where we need to dig in a little bit deeper, where we need to expand, what the strengths of our manuscript are so that we can lean into those and really use them for all they can be used for, and to help us see that we have both strengths and weaknesses in that manuscript, and that both are worth honoring and celebrating. Now, this is what effective feedback can do for you, and I promise I see it all the time. When you work with someone who knows, who has been given direction at least on how to give solid feedback, you can get some of this input that you're wanting, both in a way that does not blow smoke, that actually does give you real improvements to make, but also that really acknowledges and recognizes the hard work that you have already done, the accomplishment that you have already accomplished. So we want both of these. But as I teased a bit ago, if you don't ask specifically for how the feedback is going to be given to you, if you are not strategic about how you go after this feedback, you are very, very likely not to get either a fulfilling set of praise comments as a part that is going to build up your confidence, or a fulfilling set of comments that are going to push you forward. Often we will end up with neither one. Can be a really frustrating experience for the author, sometimes even to the point of demoralizing, even to the point of making you lose confidence. And of course, especially when we're talking to people that we know and love and that we have gone to because we trust them, it can be quite damaging to the relationship to set out to get this feedback. We haven't really thought about what we need, what we want, and we most importantly have not communicated with others what we need and want. So with that said, let's talk about these 3 concrete ways that you can go about making sure you have effective feedback on that manuscript. Okay, so the first way that you're going to go forward with a strategy for your feedback is I want you to consider what level of feedback you need at this moment. Now, this comes up for me because I have been hearing more about beta readers again lately. This is something that kind of comes in and out of vogue. You'll hear it sometimes very, very trendy to get a lot of beta readers. And then sometimes we kind of forget that they exist. So I want to dig into the levels of feedback because I do find that there is a lot of confusion here. So the first thing we want to do is think about who's going to give us this feedback. Now, you really have 3 tiers here to choose from, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to choose between these tiers depending on the stage that you're in right now. Now, the first tier I've already kind of been talking about, and that is asking friends and family members for feedback. Now, when we do this, it is very often leaning much more heavily toward needing that confidence boost than it is in terms of digging into more depth, getting kind of more, getting a push so that we're really kind of pushing ourselves, stretching ourselves to make that book the best it can be. Oftentimes, when you're asking friends and family for feedback, they are usually not really equipped to give you this type of pushing feedback. Oftentimes, you are probably with the friends and family group leaning more toward wanting that kind of confidence boost. What did you like? What resonated with you? What made sense? So, when we're thinking about this group, I want you to really think about at what stage in the writing process would that particular type of feedback align with what you need. Now, I often find that friend and family feedback, while it is the easiest, it is inexpensive or most of the time free, it can be something that we're drawn to right when we finish that book. But let me tell you, you probably got one really solid read from your friends and family members before it's just going to start glazing their eyes over. Most of the time, people who are not professional editors cannot read a manuscript multiple times and really be able to notice substantive changes. Professionals sometimes can't, so we're not trying to be too hard on them. But what that brings me to is that the ideal time to ask your friends and family members for feedback is often not right away when you finish the manuscript, but rather after you have done some of the improvement work already, so that what you're delivering them is something very, very close to what you'll end up publishing. Now, this actually is a really strategic way to move forward with feedback. We just have to, again, keep in mind what we're getting from it. And as I teased earlier, typically we're going to be the most satisfied with that feedback if what we expect from it is to kind of build us up, to boost our confidence, to really help point out what those strengths are. But there's also a secret kind of hidden reason that getting this type of feedback can be really helpful, especially a little later in the process. And that is that when we get some of these early readers who are really supportive of us, showing them a book that is very nearly ready to come out can be so, so helpful in our promotional efforts. If we show them this book that is almost what it's going to be, we might make some tweaks here or there. We probably haven't gotten our kind of finalization, our copy edit, our line edits done yet, but they can really see what the book is going to be. And y'all, I find that the best friends and family members will be so hyped up for you. And this is what you need at the stage that the book is about to go into the real world. At that point, you are about to feel really, really vulnerable about putting your baby out into the big bad world. Having this feedback from your friends and family at this point, the point when you're just ready to release it, can really help both you and the book's just needs for getting out there, for other people hearing about it, for reaching the market and creating demand. So, when we're talking about this first type, the friends and family feedback, I typically will recommend save that for down the line. Now, let me give a kind of quick caveat because I do sometimes find that folks will say, well, I am going to ask my friends and family, but my friends and family are a little bit different because my aunt was an English teacher or because my grandfather, worked as a journalist, or they have some kind of history with wordsmithing. And I just want to caution you here because remember that when we are thinking what is really going to be the most effective feedback from our friends and family, even when we're talking about an English teacher aunt, even when we're talking about someone with some writing experience, knowing how to write, and in fact, knowing how to correct grammar especially, is not the same thing as knowing how to give effective feedback on a full-length nonfiction manuscript. That is its own skill. So be really careful with your expectations here. Often I find that when we're thinking of the friends and family tier, it almost always makes the most sense to lean into the fact that they love you. That is what they can provide that no professional can. They can really see who you are, what you're trying to do, why this matters to you, sometimes in ways that you can't see. So let's lean into that rather than trying to use some of these skills that aren't exactly aligned. Of course, they're important skills, but we are not looking for grammar check at this point. So let's save that review from Aunt Ethel until we get a little bit further down the line. And I am sure that she will both give you some grammar tips and love on you in the way that you need. Okay, the second type of tier of editorial support that we might get would be a beta reader. Now, I teased this already because I hear this term kind of floating around, but I often find that folks aren't super clear on what is meant by it. Now, oftentimes when I will ask folks, do you have any professional support? Have you gotten professional feedback yet? Because typically I'll hear from people who both are very early in their journey and those who really have already done a lot of this polish work. Well, sometimes when I ask folks, have you gotten any professional feedback? They'll tell me, well, I have beta readers. Now, I get this because beta readers are a kind of funny category. On one hand, you do pay a beta reader. These are typically freelancers. They're folks who are used to reading books and giving a little bit more holistic feedback. So on one hand, they are professionals. They have done this before. Now, that's really good because typically beta readers are not going to make that mistake that I pointed to earlier with friends and family, where they're either saying, I loved everything, it was so good, or marking it all up in red pen. But beta readers are also not professional editors. Even those who have some training, that's really not what the engagement of a beta reader is. The thing a beta reader is doing is telling you what that person, if they were reading your book, would think about as a reader. Now, it's important to kind of tease out the distinction between thinking of how does a reader respond versus how does an editor respond. Because while it is important to know how your reader responds, you are not getting the whole picture that you would get from an editor because readers are not thinking about you. When you get a beta reader, they are thinking about what their experience of reading the manuscript is. Now, that's very helpful. We do need to know what a reader will think. At the same time, typically readers will not give you a lot of that push. What could you do more? Where could you go into depth? Which of these ideas has much more promise that you haven't quite pulled out yet? These are things that, spoiler alert, my third category are going to be able to provide. But beta readers are not angled toward that. Beta readers are, first of all, not getting paid the amount that they would need to really comb through your manuscript and figure out what's going on there. But second of all, beta readers are hired for a very specific purpose, and that is to be a beta reader, a reader that is coming in just before the quote-unquote real readers. Now, I want to give you one tip that is crucially important when we are thinking about beta readers. And that is that, remember what I said, they are not giving you an editor's feedback. They're giving you a reader's feedback. Now, you do not want every reader. If what you have written is a business book that is going to disrupt the entire industry you are in, it's going to show everyone a new way forward in how to set up your business, how to make sure that things are really moving in the direction that they want them to. You're so excited about these ideas. Well, imagine sending that to a romantasy reader. they're not going to be able to give you the feedback you want because they are not your reader. And that's the thing I want to make sure you're really, really clear on with beta readers. You are getting feedback that mirrors your reader. So your beta readers need to match the type of reader that you want. And ideally, they should both match that in terms of the types of things they typically beta read. But more important and much, much more to the point, they should actually match that in terms of what they read for their own enjoyment. So you really want to make sure when you've got beta readers that they are actually in your audience, because all these psychodemographic things, those are all really, really important. We've got to know, where do they hang out? What kinds of things do they like to do? What is their daily life like? What is their family and friend structure like? All of these things, these psychodemographics, they all go into how readers will enjoy your book and the things that they will want more of or less of or adjustments on. So if we have the wrong type of beta readers, we are not going to get the right type of feedback. So buyer beware with that. Now, I never want to discourage folks from things they think could be helpful, but I do always want to say, in my experience with nonfiction, beta readers are typically not as helpful as folks think that they will be. So my honest advice is to skip the beta readers. But if you are set on beta readers, if you've already hired them, if you know you want to use them, do not let me discourage you. There are things that can be had from a beta reader. My experience is just that they're not necessarily worth that kind of extra step, extra investment, extra coordination, extra hiring. There's just a lot that goes into getting beta readers. For nonfiction, I find that that's not as helpful. You kind of wrote the book you want to write, right? It's typically much more about pulling ideas out, developing them a bit more. Whereas beta readers can be really, really helpful for fiction, where we have a little bit more leeway and kind of flexibility to adjust the plot, adjust the characters, adjust the tone, the mood, etc. So that is beta readers, what we will call our kind of second middle tier of professional feedback. And then we also have our third tier. Now, this is professional editorial feedback. Now, this is something that I believe so strongly in. And not only because I am an editor, although, full disclosure, I am an editor, I do give editorial feedback as a professional. But the reason that I so deeply believe in professional editorial feedback, particularly from someone who is well trained in this skill, is that what professional editorial feedback can give you is all of the above. Professional editorial feedback can give you that confidence boost of, look what you're doing well. I see throughout the manuscript you are pulling in these strengths. Look at all of these things you have done. Look at all you have accomplished. We get that from the friends and family level with a professional editor. We also get the beta reader perspective. We also hear what it's like to read your book, the parts that were exciting, the parts that made me laugh, the parts that made me cry, whatever that may have been. I get that reader experience with a professional editor. I get that sense of how the book reads. So that's something that I get from the beta reader. I also get any major issues in the lines. Is there any issue with voice? Are there repeated issues in kind of how this is being written up? We get feedback on that we might get from Aunt Ethel. And the most important thing that you will get from a professional editor is that you will get a sense of what your weaknesses are, but also how to fix them. Now, I want to mention really quick and just give you this kind of concrete example of what this might look like. Page and Podium offers this service. This is called a manuscript review. Not a super creative or clever name. It is what it is. And that is what the review is as well. When we do a manuscript review, we are going through and we are looking for the market position. Here is where the beta reader factor comes in. Where in the book industry classifications do we see your book fitting? And does that audience then match what you had in mind? This can be such helpful feedback. We also are going to make sure that you have a pitch that you can see. How did we understand the meaning of this book? How did we understand what you were trying to communicate to us? Because again, if we're not aligned there, that is very, very helpful feedback. We almost always are. I'm actually not sure we ever have not been, but it is really good to see that alignment or misalignment. It's going to tell you a lot about how your book is reading, again, to readers. But the most important parts of a manuscript review service from Page and Podium is both your analysis and your recommendations. Now, in the analysis part, we're going to give you 4 or 5 pages digging into the strengths of that book, as well as the things that really need a little more pulling out. Now, I almost always find that these two factors, although they seem oppositional, are almost always linked. We can almost always look at a strength you already have, and because I've been doing this a long time, we can almost always match it with a weakness. So we know that if you have this skill over here and you have this weakness over here, if those can work together, you are golden. You not only now have improved this weak spot in your manuscript, you have done it in a way that really showcases your strengths. Well, this is amazing, right? This is exactly what we need. So through the analysis, we are putting together the strengths and the weaknesses and really looking at how the strengths can serve those weaknesses and bring your book really into that kind of crystal clarity that you're looking for. But the recommendations piece, this is where things really get practical. When we get down to the recommendations in your manuscript review, we are telling you specifically, here are the weaknesses and here are the places that you should target to get the most bang for your buck in this set of revisions. Effectively, these were the things that really disrupted the reading experience. And if you can plug in X and Y and Z into those trouble spots, you really boost the entire book greater than the sum of its parts, because we're not going through and making little individual edits. We're thinking holistically about your book's strengths, about its weaknesses, and how we can really strategically use the things that make you, the things that make you an expert author, to pull everything into focus. Well, that is an excellent book, right? That is a book that then when you show to beta readers, if you choose to do that, they can focus just on the reading experience. They are not worried about these disruptions, the things that are pulling them out of the book. You fixed them already. And let alone when we finally get to the friends and family tier of feedback, now you know you have solved all of the major structural components, the major overarching, the major 10,000-foot view issues in that manuscript. Well, now you can really have the joy of that experience of sharing this book with your friends and family and really hearing about their experience of reading it. This is so, so important. So I want to encourage you, as you finish that manuscript, give it a read through, do all of the revisions that you think you can. But I would love to work with you on a manuscript review. If you're interested in reading more about that service, you can do so at pageandpodium.com/manuscript. And at that link, you'll be able to see all of the details, what is included in that service, and get signed up if you have a manuscript that you are ready to get started on. Okay, so the first tip that I have, I want you to think about the different tiers of feedback, who you might be getting feedback from, because it can be really helpful to be strategic and make sure that you are matching up the stage that your manuscript is in with the type of feedback, the person that you're getting feedback from. Okay, the second overall tip that I have is be really specific about what you need. I often find that when we need feedback on anything, this goes for manuscripts, but it also goes for outlines, chapters, articles, we often have the impulse to sort of just send it off, kind of look the other way. It feels painful to get that manuscript off of our desk and we know it's in front of somebody else. We hope we don't look silly. We hope we didn't embarrass ourselves. Just get away from me. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But y'all, this is not the way. When we really just push our manuscript away from us and we don't give any kind of clear expectations for the person that's reading it, what often will happen is that we'll have a misalignment, not in terms of taste, not in terms of kind of evaluation of the manuscript, but we'll have a misalignment in terms of what is expected of that exchange. Now, as I teased earlier, when you're talking friends and family specifically, we often want to make sure that those relationships are maintained. And since I work with a lot of memoir, I can tell you that there also is this issue of having people who are in the book read the book that can really raise the tension on this. It can really make it even more difficult to do what we know we need to do. Well, the solution here is to be very, very clear about what you need. Now, you can kind of come up with some questions, some things that you'd like them to answer, but I really suggest that you stick to things like structure. Now, if you're asking someone for structure and they are not a trained editor, you need to ask in a really specific way, right? So you might ask something like, does this story hang together? Did you feel like there were parts of my book that dragged? If you're doing a non-memoir, just a general nonfiction, you might say, were there any concepts that weren't as clear to you? Are there any examples that jumped out? What we're trying to do here is really dial in, really narrow down to what's going to actually be helpful for you, but put in a type of language that actually is answerable by your reader, by the person that's giving feedback. So think about things like structure. Does this all make sense? Does it flow? Does the pacing feel right? Did it feel like it moved quickly when it needed to? Did it feel like it slowed down when it needed to? You can ask questions about the tone or the vibe. Did you feel like the kind of emotional energy was correct? Did it feel kind of what you would expect? Were you able to feel along with me? If there were sad parts, did you cry? If there were funny parts, did you laugh? With general nonfiction, this might be kind of similar. Did you feel that the tone, the vibe, the voice, did you feel that those matched the topic that I was trying to convey? With nonfiction, especially the type that I typically work with, you might ask something like, did you understand the urgency of this issue? Were you able to understand the common mistakes that people are making outside of this framework? And we can also ask questions about the content. Here is where we're going to be asking, did you think that the stories were effective? Were there things you were surprised to see left out? This is a great question, by the way, for friends and family. You can ask whether there are parts where they would like a little bit more expanded information, or parts, on the other hand, where you've given too much information. It either felt overwhelming, boring, whatnot. You will know your book. You will know where you really are not certain of what to do. And this is the point where you really need to think about, what is it that I want from this person? Be very, very clear. And I often suggest limiting your specific questions to 3 to 5 or so, because one thing that can happen is that people will just get really excited to give you feedback. They're giving you their time, they're giving you their energy. But oftentimes, we really just need a kind of a narrow set of information. If we can be very specific with them, usually folks are happy to give you what you need. Okay, so the second tip is ask specifically for what you need. And the third tip that I want to share is consider alternatives in terms of how the feedback is shared. Now, the most obvious, the thing everyone defaults to, is sending the manuscript and then getting it back marked up, either by hand or track changes, comments, that kind of thing. At Page and Podium, we actually are not a fan of this. Now, of course, down the line in our production publishing process, if you would get a copy edit from us, we of course do give you a markup document and a clean document so that you can see what's happening within the line level. But that is not what we're talking about here. We are talking about 10,000-foot view feedback, the type of feedback that would be appropriate for friend and family review, beta readers, and of course, an overall editorial assessment. Now, one thing that I have seen way too often is first-time authors who go to get a developmental edit. This is a great service. We do offer this service as well. I just typically do not push it to people, because what I find so often is that a developmental edit will end up being information overload. Now, here I need to distinguish between a developmental edit and a manuscript review, because I know that these are things that get kind of lumped together. It's really difficult to tell the difference. When we're thinking of a developmental edit, we are talking about a markup of the entire manuscript. We'll have comment bubbles throughout. We'll have red line, track changes, things that are being suggested within the manuscript. We're going through this whole entire manuscript with very micro level feedback. Now, typically with the developmental edit, you will also get a letter. These can be quite long. I've seen them be 7 to 9 to 15 single-spaced pages, really detailing everything that needs to change. And this is where I start to really, really hesitate. This is where I have, frankly, seen this blow up in first-time authors' faces. Because if you have never written a book before, you probably have a non-small amount of fear about showing it to other people. And what I see too often happen is the developmental edit comes back all marked up. You get this letter back. It's huge. And what do you feel? You feel like you don't know how to do any of that. You feel like it's overwhelming. You feel like, what's even going to be the payoff? And here is where I'm suggesting that we got to think outside the box here. marking up a manuscript can be very, very helpful down the line. Once we've got all the structural revisions made, once we're certain the content is how we want it, once we know we've got the voice and the tone and the vibe where we want them to be, by all means, get that copy edit markup, get that line edit markup, get somebody in there with their red pen. But most authors are not actually ready for that when they first finish their first manuscript. Most authors need to be able to see the 10,000-foot view. Why am I changing this scene? Why am I adding this bit of context? Why am I deleting this entire section? With the developmental edit, it's very, very easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees because we have all of these specifics without a really clear sense of how they fit together. And this is why I would suggest we just stop marking it up. What I find across the board with our manuscript review process is that because we don't have pages and pages of markup, because we are just very clearly explaining to you the strengths and weaknesses, how they work together, and practically step by step, how to correct the weaknesses by applying your strengths, it's much, much less overwhelming. Now, is it easy to make revisions? No, never. But at least we are not looking at the feedback itself and feeling ourselves buried in overwhelm. That is the thing I want us to avoid. So I've got two different ways that you can think about a different type of approach to feedback that I find help almost as much as the first two tips I've given. The first way I've already hinted at, and that is that rather than marking up within the manuscript, ask the person giving you feedback to write you descriptions of what the overarching issues are. I find that this keeps your feedback person, again, particularly if it's a friend or family member, from the temptation to mark up at the line level because you have specifically asked them to give you paragraphs, to tell you, to just explain their reading experience rather than mark it up within the manuscript. But the second alternative, I actually find to be just as strong, if not stronger. And that is, instead of using written feedback at all, schedule a call. Now, if you are working with friends and family members to get feedback, this is often best done in person. You can sit and just chat. And the reason is, when you have a conversation, rather than written feedback that goes from one to another, that conversation allows you to ask questions. It allows you to clarify things. It allows them to be honest with you, but still have a way to kind of read your expression. So if they start to go to biting, to cutting, we've all got friends and family who are really critical. They don't necessarily mean to be, it's in love, but if it gets too much that way, they can see your reaction. You could even, say, hey, can we back up a little bit? I'm not sure that I'm totally understanding kind of the whole perspective here. You can really navigate that relationship in real time. Now, I know this can sound much, much scarier to do this in person rather than in writing, but I really do find that it is very, very helpful to have that point of connection, that kind of just human connection where you can talk together, really recognize and acknowledge what each other were trying to do, you with the manuscript and they with their feedback. Now, this is part of Page and Podium's manuscript review process. Everyone gets an hour coaching session at the end, designed really not only for this type of Q&A, for this real discussion of what are we seeing in here, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, but also because I want to make sure that you have a plan. I do not want to give anybody feedback that they don't know how to implement. And that is another reason that having this other format, this speaking format, no matter who you're getting feedback from, can be really, really helpful because we really can kind of target it. We can think about, okay, that was your experience of reading the manuscript. Well, now what do I, the author, want to do with that feedback? This is done so much more easily in a conversation, but again, with a professional, you're often going to be able to be guided through the process rather than having to guide someone else through the process. So, all right, today we have talked about 3 concrete ways to make sure that the feedback you get on your nonfiction manuscript is actually effective. None of us want to be asking people to give us feedback that then we don't implement, that we don't understand, that makes us angry, and even that hurts the relationship. So if you can, number 1, strategize the type and level of feedback that you need and from whom. 2, make sure that you are clear about what you actually need from that feedback. And 3, Finally, consider a different format to make sure that you really have the relational element of that feedback process front and center. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I would love to review your manuscript. We offer this service year-round. It is a 2 to 3 week turnaround. Once you head over to pageandpodium.com/manuscript, you'll be able to see details and get enrolled in that service. And then you can send your manuscript along and be sure that you are going to get that feedback you need on your manuscript strengths and weaknesses, but most importantly, practically how to move forward to use those strengths to make sure that your book is as strong and solid and excellent as I know you want it to be. Happy writing. Every expert author's book is unique. And one of the things that we in the book industry are called to do is to draw out that uniqueness and meet every author where they are. And that's why I created the Expert Author Quiz. This freebie is going to give you a chance to go through the most common questions that I use to diagnose where folks are on their book journey. The quiz takes 3 to 5 minutes, and when you're done, you'll get a full readout of other authors just like you who have made it big in the industry, as well as the strengths you've got, the likely weaknesses along the way, and of course, some practical, personalized advice on how to best move forward. You can take the quiz now at pageandpodium.com/quiz.